She never raised her voice, never complained. Every day, she walked the same hallway, head down, while whispers followed her like shadows. To them, she was invisible, an easy target, someone they could laugh at without consequences. They didn't need fists. A smile, a joke, a phone held up just long enough. That was enough. What they didn't know, what no one thought to warn them about, was that this school only existed because of her family. And this was the moment everything began to unravel. Her name was Naomi Clark. She wore the same navy cardigan most days, paired with simple jeans that had been washed so many times the denim had softened to something closer to cotton. Her shoes were practical black flats, not fashionable, not statement pieces, just functional. Her hair was pulled back in a low ponytail, the kind that suggested efficiency rather than style, pulled tight enough that it never fell into her face during long hours bent over textbooks. She arrived at Westridge Academy 20 minutes before the first bell every morning. She left an hour after the last one rang. She sat in the middle rows of every classroom, never front where teachers would call on her constantly, never back where troublemakers congregated. The middle was safe, anonymous, a place where you could blend into the fabric of institutional education and disappear. In a school full of noise, lockers slamming, voices echoing off polished floors, designer sneakers squeaking against tile, she had mastered the art of taking up no space at all. Westridge Academy was the kind of private school where tuition cost $68,000 a year, where college acceptances to Ivy League schools were printed in gold lettering in frames that lined the main hallway like trophies, where the student parking lot looked like a luxury car dealership filled with Range Rovers and Tesla Model S sedans, gifts for 16th birthdays that cost more than most families earned in a year. The building itself was red brick and ivy, designed to look like East Coast old money even though it sat in the suburbs, surrounded by manicured lawns and tall oaks that had been planted precisely to create the impression of legacy. Inside, the hallways were wide and bright, lined with floor-to-ceiling windows that let in natural light. The library had leather chairs and mahogany tables. The cafeteria looked more like a boutique restaurant than a school lunchroom, with its industrial lighting and artisanal pizza station. Everything about Westridge communicated one message: you have arrived. And if you hadn't, everyone would know. The girls who ruled it didn't need crowns. They had something better: effortless belonging. Madison Porter was their center of gravity. Blonde hair that fell in perfect beachy waves, the kind that required $200 at a salon to look natural. Sharp-tongued in a way that people called witty instead of cruel, because her father was a state senator and her mother chaired the PDA. She moved through hallways like she owned them, her designer bag swinging from one shoulder, her laugh carrying across crowded spaces with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. Because in every way that mattered to a 17-year-old, she did own them. Beside her was always Haley Chun, quieter, but no less dangerous. Haley had perfected the art of the meaningful glance, the withheld invitation, the screenshot sent to just the right group chat at just the right moment. She dressed in monochrome outfits that looked effortless but cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her cruelty was surgical, precise. She never raised her voice because she didn't need to. Then there was Brooke Mathis. She laughed the loudest, filmed the most, treated social cruelty like performance art. Her phone was always in her hand, always angled just right, always ready to capture the next moment that could be turned into content. She had 43,000 followers on social media. She posted daily. Her brand was aspirational lifestyle, mixed with just enough mean girl energy to feel authentic to teenagers who couldn't tell the difference between personality and performance. They were untouchable, and they knew it. Naomi had learned not to make eye contact with them. Not because she was afraid, though fear would have been reasonable, even justified, but because she understood something most people her age didn't yet grasp. Some battles aren't worth the energy they require. Some fights are designed to drain you, to make you react, to turn you into the villain of your own story. So she kept her head down. She did her work. She moved through the halls like a ghost. And she waited. It started small, the way these things always do. A laugh that lasted too long when Naomi walked past the senior lockers. A seat suddenly occupied when she approached a lunch table, bags and jackets strategically placed to communicate fullness even when there was clearly room. Her name mispronounced during roll call, Naomi, instead of Naomi, then corrected with exaggerated, syrupy sweetness. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Naomi. I always forget. It's just such an unusual name." Madison said it with a smile that never reached her eyes, that particular expression teenage girls perfect around age 14 when they realize that plausible deniability is more powerful than outright aggression. In the cafeteria one Tuesday in late September, Naomi sat alone near the windows that overlooked the lacrosse field. She brought lunch from home, leftover pasta with vegetables in a plain Tupperware container, the kind with the faded blue lid that had been microwaved so many times it was slightly warped. She ate slowly, deliberately, reading a paperback copy of Beloved with a cracked spine and pages softened by repeated reading. 3 tables over, Madison held court at the prime location, center of the room, maximum visibility. 6 girls surrounded her, an orbit of social validation. God, can you imagine eating that in public? Madison's voice carried just far enough to be heard, but not so far that a teacher would intervene. Haley glanced over her shoulder, took in the scene with one practiced sweep of her eyes, then turned back. "I literally can't. Like, we have a salad bar. It's giving poverty lunch vibes," Brooke added, her phone already angled slightly in Naomi's direction. Not obvious, not direct, just enough to capture the image without seeming intentional. The photo appeared in a private group chat within 40 seconds. When you can't afford the meal plan. 43 people saw it before the lunch period ended. Naomi turned the page of her book. Her hand didn't shake. She chewed her pasta carefully, swallowed, took a sip of water from a reusable bottle, and turned another page. She had learned that reaction was fuel, that any visible emotion would be screenshotted, shared, dissected, so she gave them nothing. In English class that week, they were assigned group projects on The Great Gatsby. Mrs. Henderson, a 50-something woman with graying hair and a genuine love of literature that hadn't yet been beaten out of her by years of teaching privileged teenagers, read names from a shuffled deck of index cards. Madison Porter, Haley Chun, and Naomi Clark. There was a flicker of something across Madison's face. Not anger, not even disgust, just annoyance. The expression you make when you're assigned to work with furniture. They met after school in the library, at a table near the back, where afternoon light slanted through tall windows. Naomi arrived exactly on time. She'd already divided the research into 3 equal sections, created a preliminary outline, drafted an introduction paragraph that established their thesis. Madison arrived 15 minutes late, Haley trailing behind her like a shadow. "Oh," Madison said, barely glancing at the neatly organized materials Naomi had prepared. "You've been busy. I thought we could split it evenly," Naomi said quietly, her voice steady and professional. "I can take the historical context and symbolism of the green light if you want to cover the thematic analysis of class and wealth." "Yeah, sure. Whatever." Madison was already texting, her phone held just above the table, so it wouldn't technically be visible to any passing teachers. Haley pulled out her own phone. Neither of them touched the papers Naomi had prepared. For 45 minutes, Naomi worked while they scrolled. She typed notes, highlighted passages, organized quotes. They contributed nothing except occasional sighs and comments about other people, other plans, other places they'd rather be. When the project was submitted a week later, Naomi's name was listed last on the title page. During the oral presentation, Madison spoke over her twice. When Naomi tried to reference her research on the symbolism of Gatsby's parties, Haley cut in smoothly with a memorized line about the American dream that had nothing to do with the point being made, but sounded good enough that Mrs. Henderson nodded approvingly. They received an A-. Mrs. Henderson's only comment. The presentation could have been more cohesive. Madison smiled at Naomi afterward in the hallway, just outside the classroom door. "Thanks for doing all that typing," she said brightly, her voice loud enough for nearby students to hear. Loud enough to establish the narrative that Naomi had been useful, but only in the way a tool is useful. Her tone was friendly. Her eyes were not. By October, it had become routine, ritualized, a daily performance with clearly defined roles. Naomi's locker was number 247, located next to the main stairwell on the second floor. Every morning between 7:45 and 7:52, the same three girls passed by on their way to the senior lounge. Every morning, the same performance. A deliberately loud conversation that began just as they approached her locker. "Did you see what she was wearing yesterday? I literally felt embarrassed for her. Like, is that from Goodwill? I don't think they have mirrors at Goodwill. That would explain a lot." Laughter. Perfectly timed. Perfectly cruel. They never looked at her directly. They didn't need to. The audience was everyone else in the hallway. 50 students, waiting, watching, learning what happened to people who didn't belong. In the girls' bathroom near the science wing, someone had written Naomi's name in permanent marker on the inside of a stall door. Beneath it, scholarship case. Doesn't belong here. It was scrubbed off by maintenance within hours, but phones had already captured it. The screenshot circulated through 3 different group chats, each with slightly different captions, but the same essential message. Look at her. Laugh at her. Remember that she is less than you. No one said anything to her face. That was the art of it. No confrontation meant no evidence. No direct aggression meant no violation of the student conduct code. Just a slow, methodical suffocation of dignity, carried out through whispers and screenshots and carefully angled phones. One Thursday afternoon in mid-October, Naomi stayed late in the art room. It was her favorite place in the school, a large space with north-facing windows that let in cool, even light. The smell of acrylic paint and fixative spray. The quiet that settled over the building after the buses left and the parking lot emptied. She was working on a charcoal drawing, a portrait of her grandmother based on an old photograph from the 1970s. Her grandmother at 30, wearing a dress with a high collar, her expression serious and dignified. Naomi was trying to capture something in the eyes, some quality of strength that had carried her grandmother through decades of teaching in underfunded schools, of raising children alone, of building something from nothing. The door opened. Brooke walked in with 2 other girls from the volleyball team. They didn't acknowledge Naomi at first. They set up at a table near the back, ostensibly to work on their own projects, but mostly they scrolled through their phones and talked about a party happening that weekend. Then, after about 10 minutes, casually, "Oh my God, is that supposed to be a person?" Naomi kept drawing, her hand moving in smooth, controlled strokes across the paper. "It's like abstract? Or just bad? I genuinely can't tell." More laughter, louder now. Naomi added depth to the shadows beneath her grandmother's cheekbones. She stepped back slightly, evaluating the proportions, then returned to add detail to the hands folded in the lap. Maybe it's supposed to be like emotional? Like representing inner ugliness on the outside. The cruelty wasn't even creative anymore. It was lazy, repetitive, but it didn't need to be creative to hurt. Naomi's hand moved steadily. Shadows deepened. Features emerged. She didn't look up. She didn't defend her work. She simply continued, as if she were alone in the room. After 15 minutes, they got bored and left, their voices fading down the hallway. Naomi exhaled slowly, set down her charcoal, looked at the portrait. Her grandmother's eyes stared back, wise, patient, knowing. Eyes that had seen worse than high school bullies. Eyes that had endured. She picked up the charcoal again and kept working. Up to this point, Naomi hasn't fought back. She hasn't told anyone, and no one knows who she really is. If you want to see how silence turns into consequence, subscribe to Against All Odds Stories. Because from here on, everything chong. Yes, by November, the isolation was nearly complete. The few students who'd been neutral, who'd occasionally nodded at her in the hallway or smiled politely when they made eye contact, had quietly chosen sides. Not out of malice. Not because they particularly disliked Naomi, but out of self-preservation. At Westridge Academy, social currency mattered more than grades. You could fail calculus and recover. You couldn't recover from being on the wrong side of Madison Porter. Naomi ate lunch alone now without exception. The table by the window had become hers by default, the way certain spaces become designated for outcasts. She walked to classes along the emptiest routes, the long way around through the administrative wing, past the counselor's offices where fewer students gathered. She stopped raising her hand in class, even when she knew the answer, even when the silence stretched uncomfortably and teachers looked around the room with increasing desperation. Invisibility had become a survival strategy, but invisibility was exactly what they wouldn't allow her. In the senior lounge one afternoon in mid-November, Madison was holding court as usual. A dozen students sprawled across leather couches that cost more than most cars, half listening, half scrolling, performing the particular type of attention that teenagers give to social hierarchies. "I'm just saying," Madison said, examining her manicure with studied casualness. "If you can't afford to be here, maybe don't be here?" Someone laughed uncertainly. "Like, there are public schools. No one's forcing anyone to come to Westridge. If you can't keep up, financially, socially, whatever, maybe that's a sign." Haley nodded thoughtfully, as if this were a profound philosophical observation rather than casual cruelty. "It's honestly kind of selfish, taking a spot from someone who actually belongs." The word hung in the air like smoke. Belongs. Naomi walked past the open door at that exact moment. She was carrying a stack of library books, research for her AP government paper on systemic inequality in educational funding. She didn't stop, didn't slow, didn't turn her head, but Madison saw her. Their eyes met for just a fraction of a second, and Madison smiled. That night, Naomi sat at the small desk in her bedroom and wrote an essay about institutional power and structural inequality. She wrote about legacy admissions and how they functioned as inherited privilege. She wrote about donor influence and how wealth creates invisible architectures of access. She wrote about whose stories get told and whose get erased, about whose suffering is considered worthy of attention and whose is dismissed as personal failure. She cited Supreme Court cases and educational policy research. She quoted Audre Lorde and bell hooks. She built her argument with the precision of someone who understood that ideas, carefully constructed, were more powerful than any weapon. When she submitted it at 11:47 p.m., she felt a strange sense of calm. Not because she thought it would change anything, but because she had said what needed to be said. Her teacher, Mr. Brennan, a 42-year-old man who'd gone into education with genuine idealism and hadn't completely lost it yet, read her essay twice. The first time, he read it as a teacher, checking for thesis clarity and evidence and structure. The second time, he read it as a person. When he finished, he sat at his desk for a long time, staring at the screen. Then he gave her a 98 and flagged the essay for the department head. Not because it was wrong, because it was too right, and because he had a feeling it was about to become relevant in ways he couldn't yet predict. December arrived cold and gray, the kind of weather that turned the Westridge campus into something out of a catalog. Bare trees, frost on the windows, students in expensive wool coats, and cashmere scarves. The school glittered with holiday decorations. White lights wrapped around columns. Evergreen garlands with red velvet bows hung in every hallway. A massive tree stood in the main atrium, 12 feet tall, decorated with silver and gold ornaments that probably cost more than Naomi's entire wardrobe. She walked past it every morning. She never looked up. One afternoon during study hall, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Just a link, no context. She stared at it for a moment, knowing exactly what it would be, but unable to stop herself from opening it. A video file. It was her, eating lunch. Filmed from across the cafeteria, zoomed in close enough that you could see the worn Tupperware container, the dog-eared paperback, the careful way she chewed her food. It had been edited with a soundtrack, some trending audio that turned ordinary actions into punchlines. The caption, POV, "You can't afford the meal plan," posted on a private account called at Westridge Confessions. 57 likes in 2 hours. 83 by the end of the school day. Comments rolling in. OMG, who is this? Not the Tupperware. She should transfer YOLO. Naomi watched the video once, then deleted the message, then blocked the number. She didn't report it to the administration. She didn't cry in the bathroom. She didn't text her parents or call her friends. Not that she had any left at Westridge. She closed her phone, put it in her bag, and walked to the library. She sat in the back corner at her usual desk and read about constitutional law and the history of school desegregation until the building closed at 6 and the librarian had to ask her to leave. The next morning, she arrived at school 20 minutes early, like always. Madison was already there, leaning against her locker with Haley and Brooke. They looked refreshed, energized, like people who'd slept well with clear consciences. They watched Naomi approach, not with hostility, with amusement. "Morning, Naomi," Madison said brightly, her voice carrying down the empty hallway. Like they were friends, like they'd shared a joke, like nothing had happened. Naomi opened her locker, gathered her books for first period, closed the door carefully. "Morning," she said quietly. Then she walked away, her footsteps even and measured against the polished floor. Behind her, she heard Brooke whisper something. Haley's laugh. Madison's voice. She literally has no idea. Naomi kept walking. It was the second week of December when things began to shift. Not all at once. Not obviously. Just slightly. Principal Hargrove, a tall man in his late 50s with silver hair and the kind of authoritative presence that came from decades in private school administration, walked past Naomi in the hallway near the guidance office and paused. "Miss Clark," he said. She stopped, surprised. Administrators didn't usually acknowledge individual students outside of disciplinary situations or award ceremonies. "Yes, sir." He looked at her for a long moment. His expression was difficult to read. Not hostile, not friendly, just assessing. "I trust everything is going well this semester?" Academically. It was a strange question, specific in its limitation. Academically, not generally. "Yes, sir," she said evenly. "My grades are good." He nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he'd already suspected. "And otherwise?" The word hung between them. Otherwise. Naomi met his eyes. She didn't lie, but she didn't elaborate either. "I'm managing, sir." Another long moment. Then Hargrove cleared his throat. "Good. That's good. If you ever need anything, my door is open." It was the kind of thing administrators always said. Usually it meant nothing, but something in his tone suggested he actually meant it. He walked away, his footsteps echoing against the tile. Naomi stood still, watching him disappear around the corner. Something had changed. She didn't know what yet, but something had shifted. In the teacher's lounge that afternoon, Mrs. Henderson and Mr. Brennan were grading papers at the long table near the windows. Principal Hargrove entered, poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot that had been sitting on the burner since morning, and stood by the window overlooking the parking lot. "Caroline," he said quietly. Mrs. Henderson looked up from a stack of essays on Macbeth. "Yes." "The Clark girl. Naomi. She's in your English class, correct?" "Yes." "Excellent student. Quiet, but insightful when she does speak. Her writing is sophisticated, well beyond grade level." Hargrove nodded, still staring out the window. "Has she had any issues?" "Socially." Mrs. Henderson set down her pen. Mr. Brennan glanced between them, sensing the weight of the question. Not that I've observed directly, Mrs. Henderson said carefully. But, she hesitated. But I think it would be naive to assume she hasn't. She eats alone. She doesn't participate in group discussions unless specifically called on. She's isolated. By choice. Hargrove asked. I don't think anyone chooses that kind of isolation. Silence filled the room, broken only by the hum of the ancient refrigerator in the corner. Mr. Brennan cleared his throat. Is there something we should know? Hargrove set down his coffee mug with a decisive click against the counter. Just keep an eye out. If you notice anything at all, let me know immediately. What kind of anything? Mrs. Henderson pressed. Hargrove turned to face them. His expression was serious in a way that made both teachers sit up straighter. The kind that could become a problem for this school. He left without elaborating. Madison's father received a phone call on a Wednesday evening. Senator David Porter was in his home office, reviewing talking points for an upcoming Appropriations Committee hearing. The room was all dark wood and leather-bound law books, designed to convey gravitas during video conferences with constituents. His personal cell phone rang, the number he gave only to family and close political allies. David, the voice on the other end said. Familiar. Formal. Someone important enough to skip pleasantries. Senator Porter frowned, setting down his highlighter. Richard, what can I do for you? We need to talk about your daughter's school. Porter's frown deepened. Westridge. What about it? There's been some concern raised. About student conduct. Specifically regarding certain students' treatment of other students. Concern from whom? A pause. The kind of pause that meant the next words mattered. From someone whose concern we take very seriously. Someone with significant influence over the institution. Porter felt a cold prickle of unease along his spine. In politics, you learn to read between lines. You learn that vague warnings from powerful people were never vague by accident. I'm going to need you to be more specific, Richard. Another pause. Then, let's just say that certain families have certain expectations. And when those expectations aren't met, when their children are subjected to treatment that falls below the standard of respect this institution claims to uphold, it reflects poorly on everyone, including the families whose donations keep the school funded, including the families whose names are on the buildings. The pieces clicked together in Porter's mind with terrible clarity. Are you talking about the Clark family? He said slowly. I'm saying that it would be in everyone's best interest if your daughter were reminded that Westridge Academy exists because of very specific relationships. And those relationships require discretion, respect, the kind of behavior that reflects well on the families who make this place possible. The line went quiet for a moment. How serious is this? Porter asked. Serious enough that I'm making this call. Serious enough that if this situation escalates, there will be consequences. For your daughter. For you. The call ended. Senator Porter sat in his leather chair for a long time, staring at his phone. Then he called his daughter downstairs. Madison appeared in the doorway of his office, confused and slightly annoyed at being summoned during her evening social media routine. What's wrong? Her father looked at her carefully. Really looked at her, maybe for the first time in months. Do you know a girl at your school named Naomi Clark? Madison shrugged, defensive without yet knowing why. Yeah, she's in my grade. What? Have you had any conflicts with her? Any problems? Conflicts? Madison laughed, but it sounded hollow. No, she's just weird. She keeps to herself. Why are you asking me this? Porter leaned forward, his hands folded on the desk. Have you or your friends done anything at all, that might be considered bullying? Posted anything online? Said anything cruel? Madison's face flushed. Dad, what is this? She's literally nobody. She doesn't even. Answer the question, Madison. The sharpness in his voice stopped her cold. We haven't done anything. She's just there. We make jokes sometimes, but it's not a big deal. Everyone does it. Everyone does it, Porter repeated slowly. And you think that makes it acceptable? I don't understand why you're. Let me be very clear. Porter stood up, his height and presence suddenly imposing in a way Madison had never experienced directed at her. You need to stay away from that girl. You need to tell your friends to stay away from her. You delete anything you've posted about her. You pretend she doesn't exist. Do you understand me? Why? Dad, she's a nobody. She's probably on scholarship. She's not a nobody, Madison. His voice was ice. Her family owns half the state. Her family has more money than you can imagine. Her family could destroy my career with a single phone call. And apparently, she's been tolerating months of cruelty from you and your friends without saying a single word to them. The color drained from Madison's face. That's not possible. She dresses like someone who doesn't need to prove anything, Porter finished. Like someone who doesn't care what people like you think. And now someone has noticed what's been happening, and there are going to be consequences. Madison stood frozen, her mind racing through months of whispered comments, screenshots, videos, casual cruelty performed for an audience. What kind of consequences? She whispered. I don't know yet, her father said. But you're going to do everything in your power to make sure they're minimal. Starting now. By the first week of January, the atmosphere at Westridge Academy had changed in ways that were impossible to ignore. Madison walked into school on a Monday morning and found herself called to Principal Hargrove's office before first period. Haley and Brooke were already there, sitting in chairs outside his door, both looking pale and nervous. They didn't speak to each other. They didn't make eye contact. After 10 minutes, the door opened. Ladies, Principal Hargrove said, please come in. They filed into his office like prisoners approaching sentencing. Hargrove closed the door and gestured to the 3 chairs arranged in front of his desk. He didn't sit down. He stood behind his desk, his hands resting on the back of his chair, his expression grave. I want to talk to you about social media usage and our school's conduct policies, he said quietly. Madison opened her mouth to protest, but Hargrove held up one hand. I'm not accusing you of anything specific at this moment. Consider this a reminder. A warning. This institution has a reputation to uphold. A reputation built on excellence. Yes, but also on respect. Mutual respect among students. Respect for the diverse backgrounds and experiences that make up our community. He paused, letting the words sink in. We have a zero-tolerance policy for bullying in any form. That includes cyberbullying. That includes social exclusion. That includes creating an environment where any student feels unsafe, unwelcome, or targeted. Brooke's hands were shaking slightly. If any of you are aware of behavior that violates these policies, whether you're participating in it or simply aware of it, now is the time to make better choices. Before those choices have consequences you can't undo. Another pause. Do you understand what I'm saying? They nodded. Good. You're dismissed. As they left, Madison saw something she'd never seen before in Haley's eyes. Fear. Real, genuine fear. That afternoon, the video of Naomi eating lunch disappeared from the Westridge Confessions account. No explanation. No announcement. Just gone, as if it had never existed. By the next day, the account itself was deleted. Every post, every comment, every trace of its existence erased. In English class, Mrs. Henderson assigned a new group project on contemporary American literature. This time, she chose the groups herself. She spent 20 minutes carefully considering the pairings, something she hadn't done in years. Madison was placed with 2 quiet students she barely knew, academic high achievers who had no interest in social drama. Naomi was paired with the top 3 students in the class, including a girl named Ava who'd won a national writing competition the previous year. When Madison started to raise her hand to protest, to suggest that maybe the groups should be randomized for fairness, Mrs. Henderson gave her a look that stopped the words in her throat. Is there a problem, Miss Porter? The classroom went quiet. No, ma'am, Madison said. Good. I've given considerable thought to these pairings. I trust you'll all rise to the challenge. At lunch, Naomi sat at her usual spot by the window. For the first time in 3 months, someone sat down across from her. Ava, soft-spoken, thoughtful. A girl who'd always been nice to everyone but had kept her distance during the height of Naomi's isolation, not out of cruelty, but out of the particular cowardice of nice people who don't want to become targets themselves. Mind if I sit here? Ava asked. Naomi looked up, genuinely surprised. No, go ahead. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Then Ava spoke quietly, not looking up from her food. I'm sorry I didn't before. Naomi didn't pretend not to understand. It's okay. It's not, though. But I'm sitting here now. If that counts for anything. It does, Naomi said, and meant it. The next day, Ava sat there again. And the day after that. By the end of the week, 2 other students had joined them. Then 3 more. Not out of pity. Not because Naomi had suddenly become cool or popular, but because the protection Madison Porter had once offered had evaporated, and the risk of sitting with Naomi Clark had inverted itself completely. Now it was dangerous to be on the wrong side of her, even though she'd never said a word, even though she'd never retaliated, even though she'd simply existed, waiting. February arrived with cold rain and gray skies. Senator David Porter held a press conference on the steps of the state capitol building. He announced he would not be seeking re-election. The official reason, spending more time with family, focusing on private sector opportunities, the usual political euphemisms for careers that ended before their natural conclusion. The real reason was never made public. But certain people knew, certain families knew, and certain futures changed because of it. Brooke Mathis was suspended for 3 days in mid-February. The official reason, violating school policies regarding the recording and distribution of images of other students without consent. It wasn't about Naomi specifically, or at least, that's what the paperwork said. It was about another incident, another student, another photo posted without permission. But everyone understood the message. Rules that had been selectively enforced were suddenly being applied universally. Protections that had once seemed absolute had evaporated overnight. When Brooke returned to school, she was quieter, smaller somehow. Her phone stayed in her bag. Haley Chun transferred to a different school over winter break. No announcement, no goodbye, no explanation given to her former friends. One day she was there. The next, her locker was empty. Madison asked around, tried to find out what happened, but got only vague responses. Her parents thought a different environment would be better. She wanted a fresh start. Family reasons. She was just gone. One afternoon in late February, Naomi was walking to her car in the student parking lot, a modest Honda Civic that she drove herself, no driver waiting, no luxury vehicle, when Madison appeared beside her. Not with her usual entourage. Alone. Hey, Madison said. Naomi stopped, her hand on her car door. She waited. Madison looked different. Her hair wasn't styled with its usual precision. Her eyes were tired. Her confidence, that particular armor of teenage cruelty, had developed visible cracks. I just wanted to say. She trailed off, searching for words that didn't exist. I didn't know. Know what? Naomi's voice was calm, genuinely curious. Who you were, who your family was, that the school, that my family founded Westridge. Naomi finished. That the library is named after my great-grandfather? That the scholarship fund exists because my grandmother believed education should be accessible? Madison nodded, looking at the ground. Naomi tilted her head slightly, studying her. Would it have mattered? She asked quietly. The question hung in the air. Madison opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Ah, yes. Of course it would have. Why? Because. Madison struggled. Because you're important. Your family is important. And before you knew that, Naomi said, her voice still quiet but carrying the weight of months of careful observation, what was I? Madison didn't answer. I was the same person, Naomi continued. Same thoughts, same feelings, same worth as a human being. The only thing that changed was your knowledge of my family's money and power. She paused. You didn't need to know who my family was, Madison. You didn't need to know what we owned or what we'd built. You just needed to be kind. That's all. Just basic human kindness to another person. She opened her car door. But you chose cruelty instead. Not because of who I was, but because of who you thought I wasn't. Madison stood there, frozen. I'm sorry, she whispered. Naomi looked at her for a long moment. I believe you are, she said. But being sorry because you're facing consequences isn't the same as being sorry because you caused harm. One is about you. The other is about the person you hurt. She got in her car. I hope you figure out the difference someday. She drove away. Madison stood alone in the parking lot, watching the modest Honda disappear around the corner. And for the first time in her life, she felt small. March arrived with the first hints of spring. Naomi Clark was named valedictorian of Westridge Academy's senior class. Her GPA was perfect. Her recommendations were glowing. Her college essay about resilience and quiet strength had made her guidance counselor cry. She gave the commencement speech in early June. She stood at the podium in the same simple style she'd always carried. Navy dress, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back, and spoke about what it means to endure. She talked about the difference between power and cruelty, about the responsibility that comes with privilege, about the choice, available to everyone, to treat other people with dignity. She never mentioned what had happened to her. She didn't need to. Everyone in that auditorium knew. Everyone in those seats, students, parents, teachers, administrators, understood exactly what she was talking about. Some squirmed. Some looked ashamed. Some nodded with tears in their eyes. When she finished, the applause was long and genuine. Not polite. Not obligatory. Real. The Clark family had founded Westridge Academy in 1947. Naomi's great-grandfather, Jonathan Clark, had been the first black man to earn a fortune in manufacturing in the state. He'd faced discrimination, violence, institutional racism at every turn. When he tried to enroll his children in private schools, he'd been turned away. So he built his own. Not a school just for black children, though they would be welcome. A school for any child whose family valued education above all else. A school where excellence mattered more than last names. A school where scholarship students and wealthy students would sit in the same classrooms and receive the same opportunities. For 75 years, the Clark family had funded that vision quietly. They endowed the library. They established the scholarship fund that paid for 30% of students to attend. They donated the land the science wing stood on. They contributed to every capital campaign, every emergency fund, every initiative that made Westridge excellent. Their name appeared on one building. They asked for nothing else. No special treatment. No preferential admissions for family members. No influence over curriculum or hiring. They gave, and they expected the school to live up to its founding principles, which it had, until it hadn't, until their great-granddaughter had walked those halls every day for months, enduring cruelty, and no one had noticed. Or worse, people had noticed and chosen to look away. When the Clark family finally spoke, they didn't do it publicly. There was no press release, no dramatic confrontation, no viral moment of justice. There was only a quiet meeting between Naomi's mother, Dr. Patricia Clark, a constitutional law professor, and the board of trustees. In that meeting, she reminded them of the school's founding principles. She showed them evidence of what her daughter had endured. She asked one simple question: is this the institution my grandfather built? The answer, clearly, was no. Changes followed. Not overnight. Not dramatically. But meaningfully. A new anti-bullying policy with actual enforcement mechanisms. Mandatory training for teachers on recognizing and addressing social exclusion. A revised social media policy with real consequences. A student conduct committee that included student voices. The Clark family didn't demand these changes. They didn't threaten to withdraw funding. They simply reminded the school what it was supposed to be. And the school, understanding what it stood to lose, not just money, but its very soul, chose to change. Naomi graduated valedictorian. She accepted a full scholarship to Stanford, one she didn't technically need, given her family's wealth, but one she'd earned entirely on her own merit. She studied political science and philosophy. She came back quiet, still, observant, patient, the same girl who had walked those hallways with her head down. Except now, people understood something they hadn't before. She had never been powerless. She had simply been patient. There's a difference. 5 years later, Naomi Clark graduated from Yale Law School. 10 years later, she was arguing cases about educational equity and institutional discrimination. 15 years later, she was appointed to a federal judgeship. Throughout it all, she remained the same. Quiet, thoughtful, measured in her words. Never cruel, never vindictive, but absolutely, unquestionably clear about the difference between power and justice. Madison Porter became a therapist. She specialized in adolescent development and the psychology of bullying. She was, by all accounts, excellent at her job. Whether she ever forgave herself for who she'd been in high school, no one could say. But she spent the rest of her career trying to help other teenagers avoid making the same mistakes. The story of what happened at Westridge Academy in that academic year was never publicized. No news articles. No viral social media posts. No public reckoning. Just quiet changes. Just systems that began to work the way they were supposed to. Just students who learned, or began to learn, that cruelty has consequences, even when those consequences are delayed. Stories like this happen more often than we admit. In schools across the world, students endure cruelty while adults look away. Some of those students have powerful families who eventually intervene. Most don't. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, should justice depend on that difference?
If you believe untold stories deserve to be heard, if you believe the questions matter even when the answers are uncomfortable, subscribe to Against All Odds Stories, because sometimes the quietest voices carry the most weight, and the people we overlook are the ones we should have seen all along, not because of who their families are, but because they are human beings who deserve better.